resource planning. Good morning. This is quite a strange feeling. I've never done a webinar before, but here we go. I guess it's a new experience for some of us. I want to talk about a project, really, that I'm working on at the moment, which is to do with using lessons learned from ERP projects, enterprise resource planning projects, to help me formulate a strategy for doing testing in a better way in these kind of environments. So a lot of this is based on experience on some projects I'm working on at the moment, but it's also a bit of a research exercise for myself. In that I'm looking for partners in industry who are ERP users who do a lot of testing and implementation and so on and so forth. And I'm looking also for some assistance from a couple of universities as well to try and build a kind of consortium to attempt to build a methodology and maybe some tools to help people do testing in a better way. But more of that later. Very broadly, the agenda is, I want to talk about why lessons learned are a useful exercise. I guess most of us have done post-implementation reviews and learned lessons from the mistakes we make in the project we've just finished. But there's a broader set of lessons that we can gather from outside our own experience, and it's a good thing to share and collaborate as well. So I want to talk about that a little bit. My introduction to ERP is extremely brief. I think I've just got one slide that had to go. So if you don't know anything about ERP, suggest you look it up on the internet. I also got one slide on ERP testing, just to give a flavour of the shape of these kind of projects. I then want to talk about some of the lessons learned, just a selection, and just give you a brief taste of the sort of things that I'm discovering. There are actually 84 lessons learned, so I can really only give you a very small flavour of what's out there. And I want to come to some conclusions and just give you a sense of what I'm trying to achieve, and I'm very definitely interested in hearing from people who want to collaborate in this way. So let's move on. I'm just getting the hang of this net meeting. Right, okay. Why lessons learned? There's a very famous saying, I don't know if it's Churchill or somebody, George Santayana, I recall now. Those that do not learn the lessons of history are doomed to make the same mistakes, or something like that. I've kind of paraphrased it a little bit. And the notion is this, is that if you don't look at history and learn from what has gone before and change your behaviour in the future, you will repeat the same mistakes. So there's an argument that says that learning from failure is a jolly good thing. It could be said you only learn from making mistakes. And what I mean by that is, if you do it right, you know what to do it right. So you don't learn anything new. If you do something wrong and you understand why this has happened and how this can be done better in the future, you learn something. So in some ways, you only learn from making mistakes. But what would be better still is to take other people's mistakes and learn from those. So you have the benefit of the learning, but you don't have the pain of the mistake itself. So I want to talk about lessons learned and just illustrate how these can perhaps help you as a tester, and just give you a brief flavour of that. And also, in a broader sense, how it can help projects be more successful. So essentially what I'm looking at are patterns of failure in what are usually large-scale, long-term projects. ERP implementations tend to be, at least 5 million euros, maybe 10. The project I'm working on at the moment is approaching $200 million. I've met other people who've worked on $500 million implementations. These are huge, huge projects in some cases. So the scale of what we're talking about here is it's well understood that the bigger the project is, the bigger the failure, and the more likely it is to fail. Investing money in these things isn't always a guarantee of success, of course. So anyway, the source of information I've used are folk from integration companies, some big organisations. One that I know very well is a company called Axon, based in the UK, quite big in the US. And I used, as an example, I did a brainstorming session with those guys, and they gave me a whole lot of war stories, examples of things that had gone terribly wrong in some of their clients' projects. So it's partly about real experience of failures, but it's also, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence to say that you should approach the testing or implementation of one of these projects in a certain way. So some of the failures that occur are kind of in folklore. within the SAP or the ERP or the PeopleSoft community. So most organizations have a good grasp of the things that have gone wrong before, and what I'm trying to do is collect from these various sources information on potential failures and then try and categorize them in a way that makes them useful for coming to a conclusion, which I'll talk about a little bit later. At this moment, I've got 84. I think I've actually got 2 more. I was 86 actual project failure notes. And the purpose of this, when I was asked by the project I'm currently working on, was they wanted to hear of failures in SAP projects. And SAP is probably the biggest ERP system around. But it's representative. That's the other thing I've learned. What they wanted was a set of challenges which I would put to the project and say, well, here's a lesson learned. This can go wrong. This is the way you would normally address it in a project. Has the project got this problem? Has it resolved it? So the background to it was the organisation I'm in is a big oil company who are very risk averse. They've actually implemented SAP 59 times. Now that just sounds incredible, and they still have problems. Well, yes, that's just the way it works. But they wanted me to check that, if you like, that all the bases are covered, that there was nothing that was missing from their plans that really ought to have been addressed earlier on. Okay, so they were looking for someone to give them an independent view of what could go wrong and how these things could be addressed. So when I meet people, and what I'm asking in terms of information is I'm really asking 2 questions. Has there been a mode of failure in production in your project that actually happened where it was quite clear what you should have done? What you should have done earlier or what you should have done at all. So on the one hand, I'm looking at actual failures, but there are also failures that were anticipated but didn't happen. So a mode of failure might be something, performance would be an obvious one. You anticipate performance is going to be an issue when you go live, so okay, we planned in our schedule to do a significant amount of performance testing and resilience and failover, whatever, and we didn't have problems in production. So the notion is there's 2 ideas. One is there's a risk that materialized, we should have addressed it, and this is how we should have done it. And the other side of it is, here's a risk, this is how we addressed it, and it seemed to have worked for us. It works for us. So each lesson, as I summarize them, it represents kind of a risk and also a mitigation. There's 2 sides to it. Now once you have a lesson, you've got the risk and how do you address it, you can then look at your own project and say, well, have we got this risk? Is it relevant to us? Is it significant? Could we suffer this problem? In our project, has this risk been addressed? How has it been addressed? And after we've addressed it, is it still a concern or are we in the clear? So it's a good trigger for a discussion with senior management to say, there are problems that you can encounter in your projects, and other people have solved these problems and addressed these issues. Here is the question, have you got this risk? And here is the answer. This is how you would address it. Okay, so it can help people to have a much more intelligent conversation about the risks of concern in projects, but also the behavior of people in projects. It's very hard for individuals to think about failure without some kind of context, without some kind of information on the table. It's very hard to give people a blank sheet of paper and say, figure out what all the risks are. So the value of doing a lessons learned exercise or taking a table of lessons learned from someone else is it gives you a jump start. Just a little bit of theory, just to be clear about what I mean by a risk and a response. Where you have a risk, there are several potential responses. One could be do nothing, ignore it. The risk isn't an issue for us, or it's too late for us to address it, we just have to live with it and accept it. More common and usually more professional, let's say, is you would take a preemptive approach. That is, you would try and either reduce the risk or reduce the consequence of the risk or understand the risk better. So the preemptive risk reduction measures tend to be things like information buying, process model, influencing, contractual transfer. I want to talk about 2 of them very briefly. Information buying is you make a conscious decision to invest in an activity which gives you more information about the risk. So you could say that a lot of testing is related to paying an individual or a team to collect information to give you a better understanding of that risk. So you might invest in a penetration test team, or you might say, well, we really need to focus much harder on getting our low-level bugs eliminated earlier in the process. So we might invest in getting our developers better equipped and giving them time to do better and more thorough unit testing. So information buying, it pretty much is about investing in testing. The second one, process model, is a slight variation. In the context of this, I'm going to say you change your process model, you change your process to incorporate another stage. So you might actually say, well, we do need a second level of integration testing. You might have a very basic end-to-end integration test that looks at information flows, but then you might say, but we also need to look at business transactions end-to-end and implement those within our integrated test environment. So you actually add to your process, if that makes sense. So is there a difference between information buying and process model with respect to testing? Well, I'm not going to get worried about it, but these are the theoretical categorizations. Risk influencing would be something like, it's too risky to build this ourselves, let's outsource it. Let's buy rather than build. Let's buy a package, let's not try and build this ourselves. It's much less risky to buy a package off the shelf. Contractual transfer is where most likely you will outsource. So you sell the risk in effect. We're not competent or capable enough to implement this project ourselves. It will be less risky to get an outside organisation to take it on from us, an implementer. In that respect, what you're actually doing is you're selling them the risk, in that they take on that risk and they will buy it off you. Probably the way to put it is they're not actually paying you money, you're paying them money. But what's actually happened is they own that risk, okay? And the exchange of monies is that they take the risk away and they also take an amount of money off you. So those are the preemptive risk reduction measures, but I want to focus on testing, of course. The reactive risk reduction measures tend to be things like, well, what if it happens? If the worst comes to the worst and the risk materializes, what would we do? Well, we might have a contingency plan. We might choose to have a rollback process. So if in the first 3 days of go live, things go so badly, we will roll back the system, take it out of production, and go back to the old system. That might be your contingency. Insurance is another one. You can take out insurance policies. I mean, this isn't a very common affair, but reactive risk reduction measures are less comfortable because you are not trying to prevent or reduce the risk. You are saying, well, we just have to live with it and change our behaviour after the risk has materialised. So using the lessons learned, which is a risk plus a mitigation, I'm suggesting it's a jump start to risk management, very helpful. And I don't think I've said yet that the risks I've collected are not all testing related. So they are a generic collection of things that can go wrong in ERP projects. And I'll show you a little bit later the shape of what I found. One of the things that's worth noting is if you start with a list of risks that other people have produced, they have a certain credibility as well. In that, when you put a risk on the table, it's there, it exists, because it has happened to someone else. That problem has occurred. Sometimes, someplace, that problem has occurred. It's a real occurrence. It could happen to you. So it's not like you've just invented this as an idea. It's not a speculative thing at all. It's a real occurrence, a real event that happened. Could it happen to you? So it has a certain amount more credibility. Once you have these risks on the table, you can get people to contribute to discussions and to look at variations. So the risk might not be appropriate for yourself, but it might be there's a variation of that very definitely could occur to us. So it helps you to get going. Also, once you start discussing risks, ideas for other risks come out of the discussions. So it's a bit like a brainstorming session. When you get the first few ideas are hard to collect, but once the first few ideas are on the whiteboard, then the floodgate opens. Then people really start generating lots of ideas. So there's those two angles. Finally, once you start including risks that are dreamt up by the people in the business, they have to be taken seriously. So most business users have lots of experience of failures in the past. I mean, I don't think I've ever met anybody who hasn't experienced problems with their software in their business history. So they already have an experience which they bring to the table, and once they are invited to say, well, this has happened to me in the past, this has happened, these can be added to the list of risks, and then they then become a very fruitful source of discussion. Should the project react or not react? Should we change our behaviour to address these risks, or should we not? Okay, I've got one slide on ERP, just to give you a flavour of what these things are about if you're not experiencing it at all. ERP is Enterprise Resource Planning. It's kind of lost its meaning now, really. ERP really represents large-scale, integrated business process management packages. So ERP might include general ledger, purchase ledger, asset management, distribution, warehousing, trading, materials management, and so on and so forth. So, and I think ERP has something like 28 or 30 of these modules. It's a huge amount of software in its entirety. Companies are taking these systems and implementing them to change the way they do business. So they're ripping out their old system and their old processes and replacing with new processes built around these ERP packages. So the nature of the project is, on the one hand, it's a package. It should be simple, but there's a huge amount of work goes into these things typically. There's configuration of the package and parameterization, and there's a different label for different packages of what they call this. But you're configuring these things, you're writing code perhaps to deal with interfaces in particular, or to change the behavior of certain screens, and so on, all sorts of things. These ERP systems are large, so typically there's an infrastructure project. You need to build, big hardware installations, maybe backup sites. There's a whole procedural aspects to supporting these very large systems. One of the characteristics of ERP systems is, and SAP in particular, is it generates data and databases like crazy. Someone told me, it was a guess, but he sort of said, I think there's about 25,000 tables in SAP. 25,000. I mean, it's just a monstrously large system. So how many things can go wrong with that? No system is in isolation nowadays, so there's usually an integration activity with legacy systems. And one of the big benefits of ERP systems is there's this notion of something called straight-through processing. So once you get all the data correct on input, many of the transactions that were done manually in the past can now go straight through. But this is totally dependent on the quality of data on input. So the quality of the interfaces to legacy systems, the quality of data in those legacy systems, and the quality of the data migration is critical. All in all, these systems are being implemented in businesses that are having to change the way they operate. Now, these are big business change projects. Possibly the software might be $10, $20, $30 million, but the business change might be $10, $20, $30, $40 million. The business changes themselves can be the much more daunting prospect for the project overall. With regards to testing, we have all the phases that you would expect in a custom build, in a custom development. So the notion of ERP systems just being a package implementation is false. They are immensely complex projects, very large, very risky. If they go wrong, businesses can be critically affected, and there are some examples of disasters that have been in the public eye, hugely costly failures. So the projects are big, testing is critical, maybe 50%. It's not a package that needs a little minor amount of testing. It's a significant investment of time to test in an ERP project. SAP testing, just as an example, it's very often done by integration companies. So an integration company will say, we will implement this system in your organization, we'll support the business change, we'll do all the testing as well. So most SAP and ERP projects in general are completely owned, if you like, by integration companies. So as a testing consultant, historically I've found it very hard to break into, if that's the right word, to get into projects to do with SAP or ERP in general. you tend to be pushed out and excluded because the integration company takes the entirety of the project under its umbrella. Now that's kind of great in some respects, but also the integrators are not always the strongest at testing. Okay, they may be SAP specialists, but their approach to testing historically may be, well, it's just a package with a bit of integration and some data migration. They don't have sophisticated processes to undertake the testing in these very large projects. So that was one of the reasons that I was interested in looking further into this. But another characteristic of SAP, but ERP systems across the board, I've heard they're all very similar in this respect. They generate test environments like crazy. The project I'm on has 9 environments. I was talking to a guy in Holland a couple of weeks ago when I did the mini event and did this talk, and the conversation went along the lines of, yeah, environments are a real problem. We have 27, and that's not enough. An incredible number of environments, and that was just for, I think, Siebel, one of the other ERP systems. So environment management is a huge problem in these projects. So let's look at a couple of lessons learned. So that's kind of the background, and obviously now, okay, where's the meat in the sandwich? Let me try and go through this very relatively quickly because I just want to give you the flavour of it, and it's a work in progress. It's not finished, okay? When you look at the 68 the lessons that I came up with, particular to SAP, which is where my starting point, there were 68 that seemed to be generic, large projects, ERP, generic kind of risks. And then there were 16 that were SAP specific. As it happens, I've talked to some people who look at PeopleSoft and Siebel, and actually most of the ones I've said are SAP specific are not. They're ERP specific. So there's probably 3 layers to this. There's generic lessons, there's generic ERP lessons, and then there might be some product specific lessons. A relatively small number, but they're unique to each product. And what I've done here is, if you look at the categories I've got, project organisation and management, and there are 9 along those lines. So this is about the overall program, project management and organisation. There are 3 of those lessons that have a big testing component. So the asterisks, the red asterisks, to the right of the list, represent how many of those lessons have a testing component. And I forget how many it adds up to, but it's about 2/3, if not more. So user discipline issues, all 7 have a testing component. What does this user discipline, what does this mean? One of the things with ERP systems is they work the way they work. And there's a big problem with organizations who go live, and then the business folk who take on these systems haven't seen the software demonstrated or tested the way they want to see it. They need to see it. And they try and fix problems in the new system the old way. And that can cause really serious problems within databases and confusion within reporting and closing docs, and all manner of things can go wrong. So that's an example. There's a section on poor test practices, and actually all 13 relate to testing, of course. So let me just move on and just give you some examples. Here's one example, user discipline. And I'm just going to talk about the ones in red or pink or whatever colour it is. Multicultural problems with common templates. Most organizations who take on ERP systems want to implement the same processes worldwide. What can happen is, the way these systems work is you can create a template, as it's called, and that template is like an implementation template. This is the way we want you guys over in Australia or New Zealand or France or Germany or South America or USA. We want you to implement your chart of accounts this way, we want you to process materials management this way, and so on. The challenge of that is that subtle cultural differences are overlooked. And the phrase in quotes is it's a real quote. In an implementation of like 7 or 8 countries, all in parallel, this was the comment. France are militant, Spain don't like what the French did, the Germans won't play ball at all. There are significant differences which are kind of assumed not to be a problem, but there you go. If you're going to implement in 3 countries, what does that mean for test environments? Well, probably at least 3 more test environments. Issues due to poor quality data. The ERP systems tend to be very much focused on perfect quality data on entry so that the straight-through processing transactions can operate without human intervention. So there's a lot of focus on the quality of data going into ERP systems. Most of the anomalies in production tend to be because of poor quality data that is migrated or coming into the system from legacy systems. So, okay, another example. Poor testing practices. I'm just going to talk about the headline. Confidence in development testing was unfounded. Well, there's a surprise. What's new about that? Okay, it came out in the discussion. I had to cover that. Last one kind of thing. Legacy system issues. When systems don't reconcile, your existing systems might be at fault. I was told a story of a company implementing payroll, and they did a parallel run. But what they did was they switched over to the new payroll system, but left the old payroll system running for comparison, and the idea was to keep it going for 3 months. So they just ran the two systems in parallel. And what happened was, on the new system when it went live, all the employees were being paid a couple of % more money. And the client went crazy. He said, look, we're overpaying all our employees. You know, there's a problem with this system. So, of course, the implementers sort of went back to the drawing board and looked at the calculation, and it turned out the calculations were perfect. The consequence was that company had been underpaying its employees for about 10 or 15 years. Of course, their response was, can you change the new system so it reduces the amount we pay our employees? We've got a real problem. There was a significant problem there. But there you go. It's typical that because these are packages, they work. They do exactly what they are meant to do. So let me just close now, next 2 or 3 minutes. What conclusions can I draw from the lessons I've got? Okay, as I say, I've got a lot more than I've just mentioned now. One thing is stakeholders clearly need to be fully engaged throughout the project. Now, you can say that about any project, but it seems particularly important in ERP systems because they generally represent very large business change projects. The next one, test review, another information gathering strategy, what I would call a test strategy, but what I would also call a project intelligence strategy, where you're looking at all the information gathered through testing and review. It seems to be more important than ever that your approach to testing throughout the life cycle is very much focused on addressing risks, achieving coverage, giving the business the information they need to make the right decisions at the right stage. Finally, environment support seems more important than ever. Again, you know, with a very large project in Holland with 27 test environments. Yes, it was, I think, the biggest CEBA implementation in Europe, but I mean, that is not untypical. 10, 15 environments seems to be about the average. It's incredibly complex and incredibly expensive and time-consuming to manage all the environments required to implement ERP. So, okay, one slide, I'm not going to introduce it very much, but just to give you a flavour of the sort of thing I want to be working on the next few months is, I don't know if that's legible to you, but there are 5 bands on the screen. So let me just say what it's about. A project intelligence strategy, also known as a test strategy, would cover all the test review activity in a project. The green boxes represent the phase of the project from requirements, the test activities. So requirements review, design review, prototyping from the left, and then the ROS view on the right, acceptance tests, operational acceptance test, and training, which has a testing component. The next blue layer down, the light blue, represents where the business must be engaged in these activities. The one that I haven't got the business engaged is development test. And actually, I've been convinced that actually I should have a blue square there too. There's business engagement required throughout the project in all these stages. The next light green one is where the integrator is involved. Okay, this is the supplier of the service. Okay, they're everywhere, sure. But the dark blue layer is where testing is involved. And as far as I can tell, pretty well every single phase, possibly including training, has a testing component. So your test strategy must address all these different phases. The dark red layer at the bottom is environmental support. If you are going to implement all these stages of testing, you need, 8, 9, 10 test environments. That seems to be the shape of all these projects. Okay, to close. What I'm really trying to do here is to try and use the lessons learned to drive an activity which is to generate some ERP generic methods and tools to support testing. So I'm looking for user organizations to help me learn, gather more lessons, but also to give me some ideas for how I can build a methodology around this. But I'm also talking to universities. I need really to get one software engineering school and one business school involved to help me look at both sides, building tools and looking at change management and risk management. The plan is to deliver something useful for the industry. So that's where I am. So thank you very much for that. A bit rushed at the end. I do apologise, but I managed to get everything in about 31 and a bit minutes. Thank you very much.